First of all, I have to tell you, it is my great pleasure to introduce an old colleague of mine. We haven't seen each other for about 5 years, so it was rather like Old Home Week. But a little background on Petra. She is so dedicated. I have never seen a person as so dedicated to her tribe. She does so many things, has a hard time saying no, and is after it 24/7, truly. But formally, she is the director for the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe Title VI program and nutrition for elderly, caregiver and support system, and enrolled member of Standing Rock. She has a background in medicine, health, and education. She has her bachelor's degree in biology from the University of North Dakota, completed 3 years of medical school at the University of South Dakota, and has her master's degree in public health from North Dakota State University. She is also a Lakota language scholar and certified Lakota language culture teacher. Help me welcome Petra.
Hihani washte, chante washtea nape chiyuzapi, wa unslawi imachiapi, ia woslaha hemataha, hunkpapa lakota na ihanktawa dakota na spawola hemacha, daya yahi, daya na daya wahi. Good morning. I extend to you, all of you, a handshake with a good heart. My name is Petra Harmon Wunhak. My Indian name is Wa'ushlawi, which means compassionate woman. I am from Standing Rock. I am Hunkpapa Lakota and Ihanktawa, often known as Yanktonay Dakota, and Mexican. So I know a lot of people are still coming in, but I'm go ahead and start. As we were preparing for this, they asked us to sprinkle in some stories, so I have to really watch my time because I do like to share my stories. So I just want to say thank you to our Midi Wankatoa relatives for hosting this beautiful gathering. And I actually want to share that it's a dream come true for me because of my own personal journey. So as Dr. Frizzell had mentioned, I attended 3 years of medical school. So when I was in junior high and high school, I went through the InMed program, and I really took it all in that it was important for us to become doctors and go back and help our people. As I was in my 3rd year of medical school doing my clinicals and staying up all hours studying and attending rounds and whatnot, I found myself in the hallway asking myself, is this really what I want? Is this really what I signed up for? Because all I feel like I'm doing is prescribing medication. That's all I'm learning. And so a lot of prayers, a lot of tears because I had invested so much into it. But what also happened was that in our 3rd year, we were supposed to pick up some research projects. And so we were in a big conference room like this, and all the researchers are presenting. And what really dawned on me was that almost all of those researchers were doing research in Indian country. And they were pretty open that there weren't too much safeguards in Indian country and that we were isolated gene pools. And I stood up. I couldn't believe it. And so I spoke up against all that research because at what point do we start to benefit as Indian people from the research? When do we start to see the benefits? So needless to say, make a long story short, I didn't finish. I was 5 months from completing medical school, and I returned home. So when I returned home, here I had been 17 years since I graduated and from high school and got used to living with being able to go grocery shopping and having access to great food. Well, when I moved home to the reservation, my boys were in junior high. And so what I ended up doing was having to drive 3 times a week up to Bismarck, 120 miles round trip, just to grocery shop for my children so that they could have healthy foods because there was such limited access in our little tiny grocery store didn't have the things that we needed. And as I'm driving on that trip, I'm getting really mad because what I learned in medical school, and I highly doubt that medical school has changed since then, is really you become a diabetes practitioner. You become really knowledgeable about diabetes and all of its complications. And of course, we're taught that if you eat right and you exercise, you can prevent diabetes. You can control your diabetes. And I'm angered driving up to Bismarck and driving home because I have a job, I have a paycheck, I have transportation, I have the means. I could buy a freezer to store all that extra food. But what about all the people that don't have those? And they're the ones who have they're the ones who have diabetes. They're the ones who have heart disease and cardiovascular disease. So in addition to not having to having an awareness all of a sudden about the limited access to the healthy food, I also had trouble walking on a daily basis because of the dogs running around on the reservation, or on a couple times with the limited walkways that we had, I had to worry about mosquitoes, running into a skunk, running into a porcupine. So of course, take off running in the opposite way because, I don't want to get sprayed and I don't want to get quills shot at me either. So that's really a major concern because all that is available for the entire reservation is that one fitness center, and they have really limited hours. So my journey has led me to the Master's in Public Health program, and I graduated with the emphasis in American Indian Health. And it was such a blessing in my life. And what I learned about it was that I was asking all the right questions in medical school. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, asking the wrong people. And in my Master's in Public Health, it reaffirmed all the things that I was concerned about, all the things that our people face, and all of the, it really addresses, didn't even know there was a term for it in an acronym, but PSE, Policy, Systems, and Environment, and how they impact our health and how they control our health. So my presentation is on improving health of Native American elders through increasing traditional food consumption. And I wanted to share one more story because what has also brought me here was that when I was growing up, my mother had an uncle who was our grandfather. He helped to raise us, and he used to go, when they would bring deer to the house, he would be the one to skin it and process it for us. And then, of course, all the aunties and uncles would come around, and they would prepare. We would go chokecherry picking, plum picking, teamsila digging. So we did all of those things, and our household was busy. Our families were busy. And when my grandfather passed away, all of that came to an end. So excuse me when I say, as we all know, because maybe not everybody knows, but in Indian country, there are huge health disparities. And one of those, I want to begin, I'm just going to share these statistics. And as we all know, but maybe not everybody knows, that there is very limited statistics available for Indian country. So this is a chart that I had put together in looking at the different sources that are available. For example, I have BURFIS. There's an organization in North Dakota Compass, that helps to gather all these statistics too. And then some statistics from CDC, and then, of course, from the Strong Heart Study, which is now, went from 1984 to 1999. And I'm going to talk about the Strong Heart Study because they looked at three American Indian populations, one in the Northern Plains, one in Oklahoma, and one in the Southwest. So when we look at this chart and you go directly down to the bottom where it says North Dakota and South Dakota American Indian male, ages 40 to 74 years old. Well, that's a broad age range. But what came out of the Strong Heart Study was that 36% of this population was obese and 41% were overweight. And for the American Indian female in this same population, 47% were obese and 35% were overweight. And what's really critical about these numbers is that being overweight, as I'm standing up here really skinny, no, I'm just kidding, but being overweight or obese increases your chances of diabetes mellitus type 2, cancer, and increases your risk of cardiovascular disease, and of course, cardiovascular events. And of course, all of these can coexist as comorbidities, and then of course, diabetes type 2 puts you at increased risk for cardiovascular disease and experiencing a cardiovascular event such as a heart attack, also known as a MI, strokes. You also have peripheral arterial disease and peripheral vascular disease. Some of the things that stood out for me in the Strong Heart study was that even though in the Southwest, the population down there has a higher rate of diabetes type 2 than the other populations, but yet in the American Indian male, especially for the Northern Plains, there was an increased mortality from cardiovascular events. So what was one of the factors that they also looked at? They looked at tobacco use. So the incidence or the rate of tobacco use among the Northern Plains is a lot higher than in the Southwest. And I was also a survey taker for the tobacco study that was done through the Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Health Board. And what came out of that survey was that Standing Rock was among had one of the most highest smoking rates in the Northern Plains, actually in Indian country, with the average age of 11 years old. The average beginner is usually 11 years old. So my question then, is it this tobacco use then that contributes to the increased mortality from cardiovascular events in not only our American Indian males, but our women also? Not just our men, but our women also. One of the things as I'm working with the elderly now that I'm really paying attention to and really is a driving force to me is that the American Heart Association has now come out with that cardiovascular disease puts people at an increased risk for dementia in their later age. So through their studies, dementia was shown to be 41% higher in smokers, 39% higher in people with high blood pressure, and 77% higher in people with diabetes. Why is this so critical? Because on the reservation in Indian country, we have limited services and limited access to services. And so I do receive calls asking for help because people are concerned that their loved ones may have signs of dementia or Alzheimer's, and they want to know how can we help them or where can they go. And so looking to the future, prevention is key, and we can start by improving access to healthy foods. So as I mentioned earlier in medical school, we were taught that diabetes mellitus type 2 can be prevented and controlled through diet and exercise. But as we all know, or maybe we don't all know in Indian country, that there are huge barriers to being able to eat healthy and to exercise. So in the reservation, most Indian reservations are food deserts. And one of my bad jokes, is that Standing Rock, and this probably applies to a lot of the other reservations, is that we're the Death Valley of food deserts. So, of course, because of these food deserts, we have limited access to healthy food, and because of the socioeconomic conditions, we have lack of transportation or lack of access to transportation. And when you have these food deserts, you have increased use of prepackaged foods with a long shelf life, and so oftentimes they just have to be cut open or opened up and put in the microwave. So you see that cooking declines, and we're seeing that in the younger generation where they don't have the cooking skills because because they're using the foods that are available to them. The diet is usually high in salt, high in fat, high in sugar, and so it's really tough too, and there really needs to be some programs that help people to resensitize their palate and their taste buds so that they're able to taste and enjoy those healthy foods. So there actually is this resistance when you decrease the salt, sugar, and fat in the diet. Of course, mentioning the exercise barriers, limited green spaces, once again, limited transportation. Your housing is in shortage, so as a provider, you might say, well, you could exercise at home, but it's hard if there's 15 people living in the house. So finding that space, even in your own home, may be difficult. Increased responsibilities for the elders and people in general on the reservation is either caring for children or grandchildren. I heard in the other talks, they talked about the historical events, the historical trauma that our people have gone through. And so just reiterating on that, in that these food deserts are no accident, and that there is historical events that have shaped the current food policies, systems, and environments on the reservation. So for example, the map of the United States, or of Turtle Island actually, shows the forced relocation through extermination of bison. And so the little maroon dots are what was left at the end of 1889 when the millions of buffalo or bison were killed. And so in the historical records, they share that there were like 2,000 bison left, and thankfully to different conservation efforts during that time, they were saved. We then had relocation of Indian children throughout the years, being forced into boarding school. And then, of course, there was the building of the dams on the Missouri River. And so my husband and I both, although we're from different reservations and different tribes, our mothers both were in boarding school together, and then they both experienced the flooding and the removal from their homes and the loss of access to their traditional foods. So I want to talk about a hidden gem of public health in Indian country. And this is Title VI. It's called the Older Indians Act, the Title VI program. And it's actually under the Older Americans Act. So on the state level and federal level, it's called Title III Older Americans Act. And under the tribal level, it's Title VI, Older Indians Act. So this Older Indians Act, this is just an overview of what's all written into this act. And there's a manual that's available online. You can actually just Google Older Indians Act manual, and there's a PDF file available online. It's really a beautiful, actually, public health program because it allows flexibility for each tribe to develop the program in which they see fit. So in this program, under Title VI, you have supportive services, just skim over them, home and community-based services, the nutrition services such as congregate meals, home-delivered meals. And I just want to emphasize that the nutrition services, both through the Older Americans Act and the Older Indians Act, was to promote the socialization for people 60 years and older. So that is key priority in regards to nutrition services. And then there's the caregiver support program. And so as I'm reading through the manual and learning about my program, this is really sticks out to me because I'll talk about it in a little bit, but just to go over the three different types of caregivers is that there's one, the caregivers taking care of an elder, elders providing care for a disabled family member, and then thirdly, there's the elders providing care for their grandchildren. So I want to share some statistics from the 2010 U.S. Census, and this is looking at Standing Rock, the Standing Rock Indian Reservation. So in 2010, the population for Standing Rock was 8,217 people, and this is both on the North and South Dakota side. And out of that population, 8% are 65 years and older. What's also in the census from 2010 is that 73% of those elders shared with the census takers that they provide care for their grandchildren. So this is huge. That to me, it just really stuck out for me. And so it's really, I love public health. I love public health because when you see the data and statistics, you're able to then gear your services to where those numbers are, where the numbers in need are. So here I have a map, and this is a twofold map actually. So one, it shows the communities and that we serve on the Standing Rock Indian Reservation through our program. And we have eight communities known as districts, and 80% of our meals are home delivered. And to qualify for home delivered meals, you have to be low income, you have to have a health problem that requires a doctor's note that says you're homebound, or you're disabled. So those are the three qualifications for home delivered meals. So 80% of our 500 meals a day, approximately 500 meals a day are home delivered. Of course, there's a lot of infrastructure problems, but I tell myself every day will get better. One of them is that we really rely heavily on our delivery to be volunteer. So that's a whole nother talk for another time, but it's just some of the barriers that we have to overcome. But yet, I also see it as a program that has great potential to reach a lot of people to provide the services that they need. I also wanted to share that this map is a food waste transmission pathways map. And this map was actually developed from he is now a professor, but he was a student from Cornell University who came out and did some research on Standing Rock in regards to traditional food pathways. So another gem hidden within a gem is in Title VI program. In the Title VI program, which every tribe practically has Title VI, is that it actually promotes the use of traditional native foods in the menu. So you can actually use funds for subsistence hunting. You can pay for mileage for your subsistence hunter, and you can actually buy them bullets. You can also use some of the funding for the processing of meat, whether it's a deer or a buffalo. I also wanted to share another little program that we have under ours, and it's the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program. And as far as I know, we're the only tribe to participate in this program. We provide $50 vouchers for our elders to be able to provide vegetables and fruits and vegetables from vendors, but vendors are also allowed to sell the harvested natural foods such as timsila, chayaka, mushrooms, chokecherries, plums. And so really, there really needs to be a push to really promote that. So there's actually some funding that can promote the use of traditional native foods. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the studies that have shown that cardiovascular disease can be reversed using diet. And these studies actually looked specifically at vegan diets. And as I was reviewing some of them, they were saying, well, just don't eat anything that has a face and doesn't have a mother. And so I was like, okay, well, that probably isn't going to fly back home because, they always say, we're meat eaters, So what do you call an Indian vegetarian? A bad hunter. Someone said it, yes. So a vegan diet isn't going to happen anytime soon for us, but in looking at the foods that are available to us, they're really exceptional foods. And today, though we have limited access to even those foods. They're highly treasured foods. and they're often called ceremonial foods. But those ceremonial foods are now what are known as power foods and superfoods. So as we look at woyute ki pejuta, using food as medicine, we can look at those traditional foods and really look at what is it that makes them a superfood? What is it that makes them a power food? And so I just picked a couple of them. For example, the squash and the beans, when you really look at them, and the food analyses that have been done on them is that they're high in potassium and they're high in magnesium. So what does this do? How does it benefit us? And so, of course, I wanted to talk about the Krebs cycle and how it's a bicycle. And if you have all the nutrients and vitamins that you need, it runs more smoothly, but we'll leave that aside. If you look at the cellular level, actually, it's potassium and magnesium that really help the pumps and the channels to operate better. And by doing this, it regulates blood pressure and blood glucose levels. So those are issues that we have in Indian country: high blood pressure, high glucose levels because of type 2 diabetes. If we also look at chokecherries, the seeds, particularly the seeds, have hydrocyanic acid. So in preparation of when they're preparing chokecherries, they often pound them and make chokecherry patties. And then they use that to make the chokecherry juice. So oftentimes this chokecherry juice is used in ceremony, and it has been shown to be a blood cleanser or a blood thinner. And so one of the studies says antioxidant properties known as polyphenols prevent oxidation and aggregation of LDL and subsequent development of atherosclerotic lesions. So the plaques that occur in the blood vessels, it can actually prevent those plaques from forming, and then of course prevents the development of cardiovascular disease. And chokecherries have moderate levels of those polyphenols. So really using that gem, that hidden gem inside Title VI, in that it promotes traditional foods, and of course, nothing thrives unless we support it, unless we put funding towards it. And so really utilizing that, and this really is a passion of mine because there's such power in our traditional foods. So when the dams were built and the flooding occurred, 80% of our traditional food sites were lost. And so limited access, there's probably some medicines that we won't ever, we probably won't see in our lifetime maybe, but what needs to happen is we need to identify those traditional food sites that are left, which are often in the ravines, and then protect them because they are destroyed by cattle, because cattle is a huge industry on our reservation. So really increasing these conservation sites, and by doing this and promoting traditional foods, we can reestablish a traditional food pathway, not only on Standing Rock, but all over in Indian country. Even maybe, or not maybe, but reestablishing the trade routes among different tribal nations. So some of the things that are happening in our program is that the tribal chairman, I wrote a letter and asked for a donation of a buffalo from our tribal bison herd, and he agreed to give us a buffalo each quarter. And so there are challenges that come up. You have to have the storage facilities, and then you have to figure out how to get it processed, what kind of meat you want, and then of course, how to cook it, because you can't cook it just like beef. Otherwise, it's a very lean meat, and otherwise people don't really, if their palate isn't used to it, then they don't like it. We also started a gardens assistance program, and I just hired a part-time coordinator who's one of our elders and who is into gardening. But this is also critical, so I'll actually going to end my talk with this part, so I'll save it. But the Gardens Assistance Program will be for the elders and any community members who are interested in gardens. and the priority will be the grandparents who have grandchildren. So we're hoping to provide seeds and soil because we lost the bottomlands, the fertile lands, and then the soil that is available are what we have on the reservation either has high salinity, high gravel amounts, or high clay amounts, and so it's really not conducive to gardening unless you bring in at home they call it black dirt, so using that terminology. And then one of the other things that we're doing is partnering with NRCS and the tribal land management. So they already have the plans in place for planting a shelter belt for one of the communities in Long Soldier. And so when I came on board, we'll put our funding together, and my request is that they plant chokecherry trees, plum trees, and buffalo berries, and so that our people have access. And actually, chokecherry trees are recommended to be put in shelter belts because of the benefits to conservation in general. So key components of this initiative is that we're using the program to provide the necessary nutrition, and most importantly, I think, is to promote intergenerational activities for the transfer of knowledge from the elders to the younger generation, because those who are considered our elders and who are elderly right now are the last generation to have that collective memory of what it was to live in the river bottom and to see the large community gardens that existed. They're the ones who have the collective knowledge of the foods and the medicines that were available in those lands. And of course, it was all a forested area, and now we live in a very deforested area. So we really need to make sure that that transfer of knowledge occurs to our younger generation. This intergenerational activity will also promote the socialization, which was key for the nutrition services, because socialization decreases isolation, which in turn decreases depression and the worsening of current health conditions. The use of traditional foods, really, when you look at it, is a holistic approach to improve the health of Native American elders on many levels. And this is my quote: "We can only begin to address the health disparities when we begin to address health equity." Thank you.